Welcome to another episode of My Wakeup Call. This is the podcast where I know people or get to know them and want to get to know them more or get to find out what they're about. And this is going to be an emotional podcast for me, and I'll tell you why. Back again is Ken Blanchard. Anybody who knows anything about management or leadership knows the name Ken Blanchard. He may be one of the top living influential people in the day-to-day management of people and companies. He's a sought-after author, speaker. He's respected for his research and thought leadership, and he's influenced day-to-day management and leadership of people and companies throughout the world. Something I'll also say about Ken is the only thing that people feel more towards him than respect and appreciation is love. And the reason people feel love towards Ken is because he is loving. He epitomizes being loving. And I don't know that he'll get this, but my regular audience will get it. And this is the greatest compliment because I've been watching some documentaries on Mr. Rogers. Ken is the Mr. Rogers of business and management. And recently I watched the documentary on Mr. Rogers, and he said, people have the power to love other people into being. On the other hand, people have the ability to criticize and abuse people into invisibility and worthlessness. Ken loves people into being. I mean, he's just manner. He's what the world needs more now than ever, and that we should all grow to be like. He had an iconic 1982 classic called The 1 Minute Manager, which he co-authored with the late Spencer Johnson. It sold 13 million copies. It's still on bestseller lists. And he's also the co-founder and chief spiritual officer of the Ken Blanchard Companies, a international management training and consulting firm that he and his better half, he'll tell you about that, Margie, began in 1979. Ken, as I mentioned to you, or I wrote to you before this episode, we have a program on LinkedIn called 90-Second Mentor, where people we share little bite-sized bits of wisdom to give people a break in their day. And so what I would love to hear from you is, you're a collection of wisdom, both from yourself, but from other people, people you've learned it from. And I have a question for you. Which do you think is more true? Youth is wasted on the young, or wisdom is wasted on the old?
Those are pretty powerful choices, and I kind of want to think that second one through because, a lot of people say to me, and, you're going to be celebrating the 62nd anniversary of your 21st birthday, why don't you retire? And I wrote a book with Mort Shavitz called Refire, Don't Retire, Make the Rest of Your Life the Best of Your Life. And so I really don't want to waste the rest of my life. So I want to see if I can continue accumulate wisdom as well as share it.
Yeah. I heard recently some sort of a quote, I think from Einstein, that said, when we lose our curiosity, we die. But share the story, your story. I mean, because you are this beloved, iconic figure, and I remember something you said about your mom saying God didn't make any junk, but don't think you're better than anyone. So can you share some of the wisdom that you learned from your childhood and from your relationships with people during your career, your life, and your wife? And just I wrote a book called Just Listen, so I'm going to shut up now and just talk to us.
Well, it's interesting, people ask me how I got interested in the whole area of leadership. And I had an interesting childhood because I went to a 95% Jewish elementary school, and Jewish holidays, they put us all in one room. And my friends, Jewish friends, still kid me that I retired the Goy of the Month award. And then we merged into junior high school with a 95% Black elementary school that in 1961 went to the Supreme Court, and that started the busing in the country. And I won the president of the seventh grade as a compromise candidate between the two merged schools. And I came home and I was all pumped up. My father was a fascinating guy. He grew up at West Point. His father was a doctor in Highland Falls at the gate, and he wanted to go to West Point. And his father said, "Son, no, I think you should go away to school." And he said, "Dad, if I can't go here, I'll go to Annapolis." So he went to the Naval Academy, graduated in 1924. They didn't need naval officers in 24. So they let him out after his senior cruise. And in January 25, he headed off to Harvard Business School and majored in finance. And then Kent went down onto Wall Street and built up his career. And he was about to make vice president of National City Bank, I think. And he came home in 1940. I was 1 year old, and said to my mother, "Well, I quit today." And she said, "You did what?" He said, "Yeah, I quit." She said, "To do what?" He said, "I rejoined the Navy." She said, "You got to be kidding me." He said, "Well, didn't I tell you when we got married, if the country ever got in trouble, I thought I owed it something, and Hitler's crazy and the Japanese will be in this soon." So he goes from potential vice president to a second lieutenant. They put him in Brooklyn Navy Yard. Pearl Harbor happens. Looks like he's going to stay there because he's 40 years old with no experience. So that wasn't my dad's style. So one of his classmates had stayed in and was a top guy in the Bureau of Personnel for the Navy in Washington. And he called him and he said, "John," he said, "what do you got for an old fart in the action? I got to get in the action." And he said, "Ted, let me check for you." And so a couple of days later, he said, "Unfortunately, Ted, the only thing I have for a guy with your little experience is a suicide group going into the Marshall Islands." And my dad said, "Well, you got your man." Of course, he didn't tell my mother. And they bumped him up a rank or two, and they gave him 12 LCIs, these landing craft for infantry, to bring the Marines and the Frogmen, which are the SEALs today, into Saipan, Kwajalein, Anauit, Tactinium, all the major battles of the Marshall Islands. And about 70% of my dad's men were killed or wounded. And I'll never forget, my mother's got a picture. I even have a copy somewhere of me dressed in a sailor suit at the railroad station to greet my dad coming home, because he hadn't been home for several years because you couldn't commute in those days. And so when I win the president of seventh grade, I come home and tell my dad, who's rejoined the Navy. And he said, "Congratulations, Ken, now that you're president, don't ever use your position." He said, "Great leaders are great because people trust and respect them, not because they have power." And he taught me that over. He said it's a myth in the military, it's my way or the highway. He said, sure, in battle, somebody's got to call the shots. But he said, if you act like a big deal in non-battle situations, your men will shoot you before the enemy. So he was quite a guy. And then my mother was just an amazing person. My father, when he was going to Harvard Business School, he would stay with his parents in Highland Falls outside of West Point and commuted to New York City for a job he had in between semesters. And he got on the train, and 2 stops later, my mother got on the train, and her family were immigrants from Germany, and her father was a cop in Fordham. And she had 4 brothers, and they all quit school at 16 because, you had to get work. She's the only one to graduate from high school. She would get on the train. And my father looked around. The train was never the same when she got on the train. Everybody's singing and laughing and all. So he said to a friend, "Who's that?" He said, "Who's that dizzy flapper?" And he said, she's not Dizzy. That's Dorothy Heidenreich. Good German name, Heidenreich. And he said, he's fabulous. He said, well, introduce me. And he did to my mother. And they rode in the train that day and talked and all. And she had her sneakers on and her shoes in a bag. And she said, nice to see you, and went off. Never expected to see him again. And she goes back to get on the train to go back home that night. And he's waiting for her. And he had never met anybody like her. You know, his mother and dad, you know, were both college graduates. His mother graduated from college in the late 1890s. I mean, women weren't going to school in those days. But he had never seen anybody like this. And so they ended up getting married. And my mom was really something. And she just loved people. And she said to me, Ken, don't you ever think that you're better than anybody else, but don't let anybody else think that they're better than you. God didn't make any junk. There's a pearl of goodness in every human being. Dig for it. So I've been a digger all my life, Mark, and looking for that good in people. And I've also realized that it's not about me. It's about we as leadership. It's not about my power. And so they really got me going. Those are kind of long-winded answer to your question, but that kind of tells you where I'm coming from.
Well, long-winded or not, it was worth every breath that you took to deliver it. Share some other things that you learned along the way. So you had a great foundation from your parents of who they were, how they were together, the relationship you saw between them. But talk more about yourself as you went through your life and how that informed the way you viewed the world and how you would dig for what's best in people.
Well, it's interesting. I ended up going to undergraduate school at Cornell. My sister was at Cornell, and she was 2 years older than me, and she was kind of my hero and my mentor. I would go into junior high school, and she'd be in ninth grade. She'd be the president of the school and giving the graduation speech. And then I go into high school, and she's the president of the school and giving the graduation speech and all. And I had been asked to for a scholarship to go to Dartmouth. I was a basketball player, and I went up and visited. They were all men at that time, and I went there on Thursday, and Friday everybody left campus except the drunks and the athletes. And so I called my sister at Cornell, and I told her, and she said, I told you to come to Cornell. We're the only co-ed school in the Ivy League, you know, and nobody leaves. So I ended up going to Cornell. And I decided, because of my interest, to major in political science or government and philosophy. But I decided that I would be interested in being a kind of a dean of students, you know, because I got an opportunity to be a dorm counselor my junior and senior year at freshman dormitories. And I really loved it and got to know a lot of the people and all. But I wasn't a great student, and I applied to graduate school and I couldn't get in anywhere. And one of the deans at Cornell had gotten a master's at Colgate University, and he called them and asked if I could, provisionally accept me to the master's degree program in education there. And they said yes, you know. So I went to Colgate and I started taking these education courses, but it was boring compared to my experience taking government and philosophy, you know. So I'm sitting at the bar at the Colgate Inn, moaning and groaning. And the way God works, you know, I think, see, life is what happens to you when you're planning on doing something else, you know. And sitting next to me was a young assistant professor of sociology, and his wife was backpacking. He had just come from the Big Ten to Colgate, and I was telling my problems. He said, well, come and major with me. And I said, well, what's sociology all about? He said, well, we study leadership and teams and all. I said, well, that sounds really interesting. Boom. So I changed my major to sociology, and I've really thought that's great. So after getting my master's, I said, no, I'm ready to get a dean. They said, no, you need a doctor's degree. Doctor's degree? You got to be kidding me. How am I going to do that? So they said, well, you need it. I applied everywhere, couldn't get in. And so I had taken a course one summer with a professor, Don McCarty, who led the educational leadership program at Cornell, the School of Agriculture. And I called him and I said, Don, because we were in a small class, could you get me provisionally accepted into your doctoral program? He said, I think I can. So I got provisionally accepted again. And I thought that was going to really be fun. I'm going to be a dean, you know. And but my professors all said, and this is always interesting, you know, they said, Ken, if you want to be an administrator at a university, if you want to be at a university, you should be an administrator because you can't be a faculty member because you can't write. I guess my writing was too, you know, down to earth or stuff. I remember one time I was writing an essay and I said, that went over like a pregnant high jumper, you know, which I thought was a pretty good analogy. And the professor said, please, let's not be, you know, ridiculous, you know, or I forget the word he used. I had to look it up. Facetious, he said. Yeah, I had to look that up. What does that mean? And so my first job is I was assistant to the dean of the College of Business at Ohio University. But when I got there, he said, Ken, I want you to teach a course. I want all my deans to teach a course. And I had never thought about teaching. Because if you don't publish, you perish, you know. And because they said I couldn't write, you know. And so I went home and I told Margie, and she said, well, you know, I think it'd be fun. Give it a try, you know. And Paul Hersey had just arrived as chairman of the management department. He put me in his department, teach a management course, which was no problem for me because I had done my doctoral dissertation on Fred Fiedler's leadership, situational leadership model. And so after a couple of weeks teaching, I came home and I said, Marge, you're right. This is what I ought to be doing, teaching. She said, well, what about the writing? I said, I don't know. I'll figure something out. And so I had heard Hersey taught a great leadership course. And I stopped him in December 1966. And I said, Paul, do you mind if I sit in your course next semester? He said, nobody audits my course. If you want to take it for credit, you're welcome. And he walked away. I thought that was interesting. I had a PhD and he didn't, you know, and he wants me to take it for his course for credit. So I told Margie and she said, well, is he any good? I said, he's supposed to be great. She said, well, get your ego out of the way and take his course. You can see the role Margie had. She kept on pushing me. So I had to talk to the registrar into letting me in. So I took Hersey's course and wrote all the papers. In June 67, Hersey comes into my office and said, Ken, I've been teaching leadership for 10 years. I think I'm better than anybody. And they want me to write a textbook, but writing isn't really my top priority, my great thing. But I've been looking for a good writer like you to co-author it with me. Would you do that? And I said, well, we ought to be a great team. You don't like to write and I'm not any good at it. So let's do it. So we wrote a textbook called Management of Organizational Behavior. I think it's in its 10th edition now. Sells more today than it did back then. And so I came to the dean and I said, I quit as an administrator. I'm going to be a faculty member. I got a textbook coming out. He said, you can't quit. I said, why not? He said, because I was going to fire you. I said, really? He says, because you're a lousy administrator, which I was. I hate that. I'm the chief spiritual officer of our company. I don't run anything. I'm a head cheerleader. So I ended up doing that. And then I went to the University of Massachusetts and worked my way up, finally became a full professor with tenure, you know. And I went to San Diego on a one-year sabbatical.
When were you at the University of Massachusetts?
I was there from 1970 to 76. I went there to be part of Dwight Allen's crazy team at the School of Education. He had come from Stanford. And he was an educational pioneer. And he said, we can do better by random chance teaching administrators and teachers we do now. So he threw all the courses out, said start again. So I taught an experimental course 155, 156, and 157 when I was there. It was really a lot of fun. And
I was there in 1969 to 1970 when Julius Irving was there.
Well, Julius was one of the reasons I went there, you know, because I got an offer to go to Kentucky. And I went down there and I was all excited about, you know, going to their games. And they said, we can't guarantee you go to the games because the tickets are inherited, you know. And so Julius was up at UMass and UMass wanted me. And I said, man, I'd love to go. And so I caught Julius's last year. I think it was his junior year report. he quit. So we were up there at the same time. And he was amazing, wasn't he? He was the first guy that could take off at the foul line and hardly even go down and just stuff it, you know. And a wonderful human being. I played golf with him one time
Mm,
at a pro-am. And he's just a marvelous human being.
yeah. Natalie Cole was also there.
That's right. Yeah.
Nat King Cole's daughter. Wow.
And the famous Bill Cosby was there
That's right. That's right.
too. And I was on his wife's doctoral committee, and it was really quite a place that gathered a lot of exciting people at that time, I
Yeah,
think.
and what was the new college that opened? Hampshire College opened also down the
That's
street.
right. That's right, down the street. So people would go to Amherst College, Hampshire College, UMass, or Smith was down the road, and then Holyoke was down. It was really a bed of education. It was really kind of an exciting.
Anyway, I didn't mean to distract you, but we may have been, like trains passing in the night back then.
Were
But
you in the College of Business? Is that what you were at?
well, I went to graduate school for a year there. I went to UC Berkeley undergraduate, went there for graduate school at UMass and in zoology, but then I transferred and went to medical school at Boston University after that. So I just stayed a year.
Just there this year. It was a fun town though, wasn't it?
Oh, it was beautiful. I had a motorcycle, it was during those days, and I remember motorcycling to Greenfield, Route 9, I think, to Northampton.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
it was just beautiful to Mount Holyoke. It was just beautiful
Yeah.
roads. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so when I took my sabbatical leave, Percy had gone to San Diego. And so I came out here to San Diego and it was, we were going to work on the third edition of our book.
Mhm.
And then we were going to write another one called The Family Game, a situational approach to effective parenting. And what changed our lives is we ran into the Young Presidents Organization. Do you know YPO? And you have to become, in the old days, president of your company before you were 40 years old and have at least 5 million in sales and 50 people working for you. And I think it's probably all changed now, but it was really quite a group. And they asked me to do a seminar for a bunch of them in California, and I did, and they just loved it. And they invited me to one of their universities where they have 500 presidents and their spouses come for a week. And I did 3 sessions, one on Monday called Different Strokes for Different Folks on situational leadership, and then Tuesday I did something on so you want to motivate someone on motivation. Then Friday I did one, so you want to change something. And I started off with about 200 of the 1,000 people in my session because they could choose things. And then Wednesday I had about 700, and Friday they had to just open the whole place up because I had almost everybody. And they said, well, you won. I said, 1-1, you're the most popular resource. What are you going to do at the end of the year? I said, I'm going back to the university. They said, no, you're not. So what do you mean? He said, you're going to start your own company. And I said, how are we going to do that? We can't even balance our own checkbook. And they said, we'll help you. And 5 YPO presidents, one from San Diego, one from Oregon, one from Illinois, one from Pennsylvania, one from Mexico City, volunteered to be our advisory board, flew out and helped Margie and I set up our company in 1979. And it's now, 40 plus years old.
So what was some of the, before we race past Paul, what was some of the wisdom that you gleaned from him, working with him and partnering with him?
Well, Paul and I really kind of developed the whole situational leadership concept together, but he had been thinking about that a lot. He was an incredible teacher. So when he asked me to work with him on that book, that was really something, because I never thought that I could write. And he thought I could because he read my papers that I wrote in his course. And so I owe a lot to Paul for getting going, and then we had a little different philosophy on running our own company, and that's why we ended up going on our own and all. But he and I kept in contact, until his death. He was quite an amazing amazing guy. In fact, I got him into the doctoral program at UMass because he always wanted a doctor's degree, and so I was his chairman. And so we had a fun, great relationship.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the time you were there at UMass, and one of our mutual friends, Warren Bennis, he went off to the University of Cincinnati to become president, and decided he didn't like being a leader, but he liked understanding them, and that's when he went to USC to do his career. And are you in contact at all with the Warren Bennis Leadership Program at University of Cincinnati?
Not really, but Warren and I used to get together for lunch at least once a month, and he would bring one of his colleagues with him and all that, and so I was a raving fan of Warren Bennis and his.
He brought me. I was one of his colleagues that he brought. We ate there down in Santa Monica, the three of us, at the Viceroy Hotel.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's where we used to meet.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to introduce you, if you're willing, to Marianne Lewis. She's the dean of the University of Cincinnati Business School, and they're starting a Warren Bennis Institute. And if you're willing, I'd like to make an introduction, because you should speak there, because you and Warren, the lovingness that you both have for people is just, it's so aligned. If you're willing, I'll do that.
Well, two of my founding associates of our company, Pat and Drea Zagarmi, studied Warren for their doctoral committee. Drea studied him as an external leader, and Pat studied him as an internal leader within the company, and they did their doctoral dissertations. And so that's when I really got a chance to experience and get to know Warren through my doctoral students, who had enough guts to go and say, we'd like to study you, because they, I had always thought his theories were really helpful and everything. And so that really is amazing.
Did you know his story about how he got into the MIT business school?
I did. I probably did. What was it?
Well, your story reminds me of it. He was at Antioch with McGregor, who wrote the Human Side of Enterprise.
Douglas McGregor, sure.
And so one of his mentors was Douglas McGregor, and Douglas went to MIT to head up, I think, the Sloan School there. I don't know if it was called Sloan back then. And so Warren wanted to go there, and Warren's story was, I remember him telling me, they didn't exactly throw their hats up in the air to have me come there. And Doug McGregor stood up for him and said, no, I think we should take Warren. I think he's got some potential. And so, it's amazing when you form these wonderful relationships with people.
Yes.
How you can be so kind and generous with each other. And it's never a chore. It's just something that we do out of gratitude. So I was thinking of that I was thinking, oh, you needed a Doug McGregor to stand up for you, so you could have gone to any business school you wanted.
Well, Dean Harry Evers stood up for me and brought me there. But it was really interesting when you take the people like McGregor and Bennis and Peter Drucker, and I was on a program with Peter Drucker when he was 95. And they were not competitive.
Mm-hmm.
We all really were trying to see what we could do to push the envelope around leadership, and weren't pushing and shoving to see who's better than the other one. And so that's why, Warren and I would share all the kind of things we were thinking and learning. And it was really a pretty powerful thing.
Any thoughts about how we can overcome how ego contaminates leadership?
Well, I ended up starting a 12-step Egos Anonymous program. I don't know if you know that. Because I think the ego is the biggest addiction in the world. And it's what keeps people from being great leaders. And there's two forms of ego. One is false pride. When you have a more than philosophy, you think you're brighter than, and then the other one is fear or self-doubt, when you have a less than philosophy, you don't think you're as good as and all. And I think the guy that I'm trying to think of his name that wrote the really good book on leadership. He said that humility was one of the big characteristics, and humility is the way to overcome a false pride, you know. And who was that guy that wrote that great book on leadership? God, I'm sorry,
It'll come to us, or we can have the humility that at our age will give us a pass and it won't come to us.
yeah, no, it'll probably come to us, but he wrote about, he said the two big main characteristics of leadership were humility and I think some drive or something, you know. But so humility is where you deal with false pride, and the way you deal with fear or self-doubt is to realize that we were talking about earlier. God didn't make any junk. There's a pearl of goodness, as my mother said, in everyone, and make sure you know what the pearl of goodness is in yourself, and so that if and it's really interesting. I've had some people in the past. You know, I haven't been out doing Egos Anonymous much in recent years, but I had a number of key people who would, when they met with their staff once a week, they would start off with an Egos Anonymous meeting, you know, and so people would stand up one at a time and say, "Hi, I'm Ken Blanchard." And they go say, "Hi, Ken, and I'm an egomaniac." And then they had to talk about a time in the last week that either false pride or fear or self-doubt bit them. And if they couldn't think of one, we said they probably lie about other things, you know, because all of us get bitten by our egos periodically, you know how good you are, you know, and so it's really is a fun thing. So if you follow the 12-step program that AA and apply it to dealing with your ego, first identifying it and and admitting it and going up the ladder. So but it is the biggest problem in leadership, I think. And it's fun when you get to see people like Gary Ridge, who he was in our first master's degree class at the University of San Diego over 20 years ago. And he got all excited about some of the things I shared. So like when I was teaching undergraduates, I was in trouble with a lot of the faculty because the first day of class, I would give out the final examination. And they would say, "What are you doing?" And I'd say, "I'm confused." They say, "I thought we were supposed to teach these students." "You are, but don't give them the questions in the final." And I say, "Not only am I going to give them the questions in the final, what do you think I'm going to teach them all semester? I'm going to teach them the answers. So when they get to the final exam, they get A. Life's all about getting A's, not some stupid normal distribution curve." And it just drives me crazy that organizations go out and hire people, and I'll say to them, "How many losers did you hire this year? Because you got to fill those low slots." No, they all go out and hire people, either are winners or potential winners. Why would you want to put them in a normal distribution curve? Why wouldn't you want them all to win? And when Gary heard that, he said, "Oh my God, I got to do that." And he implemented that whole process in WD-40. And we ended up writing a book about it called "Help People Win at Work." The subtitle is fabulous. A business philosophy called "Don't Mark My Paper, Help Me Get an A." And the last time they measured it, I think they got a 92% employee engagement score at WD-40, and the growth and all the kind of thing that did under Gary's leadership has just been fabulous, but with very low ego needs.
So more nuggets of wisdom about engaging your people in causing them to have a positive attitude and causing them to want to be the best version of themselves and bring that to work. Any other additional observations about how you can do that?
Well, I'm a big believer in servant leadership. And a lot of times when I talk about servant leadership, they think I'm talking about the inmates running the prison or trying to please everybody or some religious movement. But there's two parts of servant leadership, and I need to explain those always to leaders. The first one is the leadership part of servant leadership, and that's about vision, direction, values, and goals. People got to know what they're being asked to do and what good behavior looks like. And that's the responsibility of the hierarchy. But it doesn't mean you don't involve them in that. You know, great leaders involve their people in setting the vision and the values and the goals and all. But it's got to be there. But it's the responsibility of the hierarchy. And if people don't realize what they're being asked to do and what good behavior looks like, shame on you. But once the leadership part of servant leadership is clear, now you turn the pyramid upside down. And as a leader, you work for your people. And your job is to help them win. It's your job to give them the final exam and get the final exam with them. You don't have to give it to them. And then help teach them the answers. So when they get to the final exam, they get A. You know, as Gary and I say, life is all about getting A's, you know, and that's what he's really done with his people. You know, I mean, he set up a thing at WD-40 where once a quarter, he calls them his Indian troop, you know. So the tribe leader and the tribe member get together, and the first thing that they do is take a look at the goals that they agreed upon, you know, and are they still the goals going to the next quarter? Because you can change your goals all the way to the last quarter. I mean, you could have set goals early on in the year when COVID happened, and I'm guarantee you weren't dealing with those goals at the end of the year, but there was a lot of people who were still being evaluated on old goals, you know. And then what's really is interesting is that the next thing that they would do at those meetings is that they had a report card, each of Gary's people. They had first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter overall performance. And for that quarter, they would look at their goals and give themselves an A, a B, or a C. There's no D's or F's. And they would share that with their boss, the tribe leader. And the tribe leader, they didn't fill out the form. The people did, and their job was to agree or disagree, you know, and talk about it. And so how do we make that? So those are the kind of dialogues that are just so powerful when you actually treat your people as your partner. And if you really want your people to be motivated and all, you know, when you sit down with them, you say, boy, it's a great opportunity to work with you all. And let's take a look at, you know, what kind of the goals and objectives that this department has had before and all. And let's together look at, are these still appropriate? You know, and let's redefine those things. And then I want you to know, I bring some things to the party, but we're in this together. It's we, not me. And I think that's just so important for people to understand that it's not about you as the leader. And so in the traditional way, people are continually sucking up the hierarchy because everybody thinks the brains are up the hierarchy. You know, with servant leaders, is what you're trying to do is get everybody ready to eventually get to the frontline people who are dealing with your customers. And you know, people say that profit is the applause you get, you know, for creating an organization. No, profit is, you know, the reason for being a business. People saw a lot of people say the reason for being in business is profit. No, profit is the applause you get for creating a motivating environment for your people so they take good care of your customers. And then your customers become raving fans of your organization and they become part of your sales force, and that takes care of the bottom line. And so I think that's a powerful thing for people to know.
You know, you mentioned also values. A friend of mine named Bill Liao, he said, you should hire people for values because, you know, there are certain values that are very compatible with each other. For instance, compassion, mutual respect, understanding, and those are compatible, just as ROI, greed, competitiveness are compatible with each other, but those groups aren't compatible with each other. And so when you're talking about a servant leader, it would seem that there are some people that have the capability of believing in their people And they're just some people, they're just never going to believe in their people, whether it's that ego controlling them or whatever.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that, about, identifying the core values of people, or whether can you convert someone who doesn't believe in their people, doesn't think about serving their people, into serving their people? I get, maybe if you show them results and numbers that they can do better by serving their people than not. Any thoughts about whether you can?
Well, it's interesting. I often share the story as I was at a part of a business school one time, and the dean wrote a lot about participative management and was quite well known in the area, but he didn't engage in it. And a number of faculty would go into his office and tell him how he was inconsistent with what his talk, and he would throw him out of the office. And I agreed with what they all were saying, but I've noticed that if you're going to give people feedback, you better have a relationship with them, because you're going to draw something out of that relationship. So I stopped the dean in the hall and said, George, you've done a lot of writing, and I'm working on a couple of articles. This is before I was writing books, and would you be willing to look at a couple of them and give me some feedback? Oh, sure, Ken. Come on in. I went in. He had flip charts, and he helped me with my writing. And I had 2 or 3 sessions with him, and finally, in the third session, he said to me at one point, he said, Ken, what do you think we should do with all the jerks we got in this school? The key word for me was, what should we do? See, he now saw me on the team, and I could give him suggestions on what we might do with the people, but I also could give him suggestions on what he could do, because I had a relationship with him. And so if you want to change somebody's behavior, don't go at them right away, but find out how you can relate to them in a way that they could begin to see you as somebody who they can trust and all, and then you can draw something out of the barrel.
I think that's a good point. Sometimes on my podcast, I'll have a guest on who I think is terrific, but is too pushy. They're just pushing. And on occasionally on my podcast, I'll just give people unsolicited coaching, and I'll say, "Can I?" And I soften it by saying, "Can I make an observation?"
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, "Okay." And I said, "Well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I like you.
Yeah.
The bad news is what you're bringing to the world is so valuable that you owe it to eliminate anything that distracts from it."
Mm-hmm.
And it's already valuable. When you are too pushy, you take away people's freedom to choose to engage with you, because they have to engage with you, and people don't like that.
That's right. Yeah.
And you're distracting from it, and you need to be more formidable, which is to stand up for the value that it provides, the problem that it solves, and it can't be self-serving.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was what's true about McGregor and Drucker and Bennis and all. They were not pushy. They were willing to share, but they also would always say, "What do you think?"
Mm-hmm.
And, so that you were part of the dialogue, even though you wanted to bow down to them.
Oh. So you've earned a sort of senior status. We could joke around that because I'm really close to your age. What is some of the wisdom of your last decade? Are there things that you've learned in the last decade that that you didn't know before?
Well, I think one of the things that I learned is I'll never forget, Margie and I were invited to Zig Ziglar's 80th birthday party. He said it was a 59th anniversary of his 21st birthday. And so I called Zig on the phone. I was like 65 at the time. And I said, Zig, you're going to retire. He said, there's no mention of it in the Bible, except for Jesus, Mary, and David. Nobody under 80 made an impact. He said, I'm refiring, not retiring. And I thought, wow, that's such a powerful concept, and so I started talking about refiring, and I was on a plane going to New York, and Mark Shavitz, who was heading up the psych department at University of San Diego, uh, State, uh, and he was there, and he said, "Ken, what are you doing right now at your age?" I said, "I'm refiring," and his eyes lit up. And he said, "Tell me about that," because he was doing some research on aging. And that's when we ended up writing Refire, Don't Retire, and we dedicated it to Zig Ziglar. And so that's one of the big learnings. And refiring is not just for any one age, it's for every age. And I was with a group of people last night where people were kind of looking at, what's next for you? What do you want to do next? And I said it's really interesting, that people would ask somebody in their 80s, what's next? And you're absolutely. I want to know what I can continue to do to make a difference. I want to continue to refire, not retire, and because I think what kept Drucker and Bennis and all these guys alive for so long is that their minds were continuing to work. They didn't sort of say, at 65, I'll shut it off and I'll go down to Florida, and so how do you keep on refiring? So that's a big learning for me, is to keep on going, and
So as you think of refiring, um, what is it that you would like to increase your influence further, in the next decade or so? So what does refire look like for you?
Well, one of the things is there's a bunch of us that are talking and having some meetings together about what could we really do to make San Diego a kind of really a servant leadership town in a sense. And what I'd really love to do is to spread the word that that there's two aspects that make you a great leader. One is results, and the other is morale and all. And it's not an either or; it's a both and. And that what you need to do is, if you care about both results and people, that servant leadership to me is the only way I know to get at it, because you get at both of them with the leadership aspect and then the servant aspect. And so I'm really interested in what we can do. And then we got some people in some other towns that are talking about, well, what can we do, And so it's interesting, and we're combining it not only with what we teach, in our work. We call it SL2 now. Hershey's group is calls it situational leadership. What we could do with SL2 to spread the word, but also I've got involved in starting a ministry called Lead Like Jesus, because when the 1 Minute Manager came out, I was on the Hour of Power with Robert Shula in his heyday, and he said, "Ken, I love the 1 Minute Manager, but who's the greatest 1 Minute Manager of all time?" I said, "Who's that?" He said, "Jesus." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He was really clear on goals. "Isn't that your first secret 1 minute goal?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You and Tom Peters didn't invent management by wandering around. Jesus did. He wandered from one little down to another. If anybody showed any interest, he'd praise them, heal them. Isn't that your second secret 1 minute prayer?" "Yeah." And he said, if people stepped out of line, he wasn't afraid to give them a 1 minute reprimand. He threw the money lenders out of the temple. "Isn't that your third secret 1 minute reprimand?" Yeah. He said, so I started to read the Gospels and went to laugh, because everything I had ever taught about leadership, Jesus did. And so with Lead Like Jesus, we're not trying to convert anybody. We're just sort of saying, my God, look at this guy. He took 12 incompetent guys. How would you like to have hired that lot? And they all were willing to give their lives, for the vision. So Lead Like Jesus is a part of this. It's, we don't teach that per se in our company, but we have a completely separate operation, that I got involved in with Lead Like Jesus. So it's really kind of fun to see whether we get people philosophically or faith-based wise and all, but it's all about servant leadership. I mean, Jesus modeled it to the extent when he washed the feet of the disciples. I mean, how many people would go down and wash their people's feet, and so it's exciting. I'm really interested in seeing how we can get more and more people to realize, and people complain about Washington, and I got a chance to talk to the kind of Christian Republican group in the Congress and all that. And I said, first of all, where's Jesus in this thing? And I said, one of the things that's the problem in Washington, we don't have a vision for this country anymore. And what does it say in the Bible? People without vision will fail. They'll. And so we have people arguing with each other. I said, stop arguing with each other. Go get the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and come up with a new vision for our country, and then go take it to the Democrats and say, here's our sense of the vision for the country. Where are you? And see if you can come to some agreement. And then once you had that, then you could disagree over ways to accomplish stuff and all, but you would agree. But without vision, people fail. And I'm just concerned that we just don't have a vision anymore. We don't even agree on values anymore. So it's but you take the great companies, whether it be Nordstrom's or Wegmans in the grocery business, or Synovus in financial services, or Chick-fil-A in the fast food business, or Southwest Airlines, and they're all those great companies. They have a philosophy of servant leadership.
What do you think the fear is that underlies people focusing more on results than morale, more on ROI, more on numbers than on people? Because I tend to believe that people are good.
Yeah.
But fear can cause them to do things that maybe are in short-term interests, but
Yeah.
but it's difficult for them to see
I
beyond.
don't, Mark, I don't always think it's fear. I think it's also aspirations, because people have heard that if you really want to rise in organizations, you got to get results.
Mm.
So they think the results is the key thing, and they forget that you get results through people, and you can get short-term results without your people being on your team, but you're gonna have problems down the line. But a lot of people aren't taught that, and it's really is interesting, because in most business schools, they don't teach much about leadership. They have an organizational behavior class, but it's more about accounting and marketing and finance and all those kinds of things, rather than, so how do you start a program? So the master's degree program we started at the University of San Diego is a Master of Science in Executive Leadership, and that's the one Gary Bridge was in our first class. And I think that being an effective leader is a transformational journey, beginning with self-leadership. And so we start off with a couple of courses where people find out who they are and what their values are and all that. I mean, when I interview people, the first thing I say is, tell me, what are your values? What guides your behavior on a day-to-day basis? And they go, blah, 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 most of them, and where if somebody says, well, I want to tell you, boom, 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 boom. Now you got somebody. Then you can see if their values are fit. It starts with self-leadership, and that's in your heart, and that's where you begin. And so then we go to one-on-one leadership, which is how do you build a trusting relationship with another person. Then you go to team leadership, which is how do you build a sense of community. And then finally organizational leadership, which is how do you build a great culture. And so about half of the courses in our program are in these 4 areas of leadership. Now we still teach finance and marketing all those other things and all, but we think that what people really need is more about leadership. And the rest is very important, but it shouldn't be the whole thing. So that's one of the things and we've been pleased that other people besides Gary have gotten really excited and implemented a lot of the stuff.
Can I share an insight that I've gathered from my book on listening has done pretty well around the world, and my LinkedIn profile is that I'm a listening coach. So teaching people to be better listeners, and then also my listening into people, I can drill down into people and find out what's really going on that they have deep shame about and deep fear about. But one of the challenges is most people in the world know they need to be better listeners, but very few people want to be.
Yeah.
So one of the approaches, and I'll share it with you because I think it's been impactful, because I think there may be a way of gaining engagement, is I will ask people, I'll say, think of someone who wants the best for you. Or you could think of Margie. She's wanted the best for you and believed in you forever.
Sure. Yeah.
And then in your mind, so this is an exercise you just do in your mind's eye, and you say, if you were to ask that person, what positive impact would it have on my success, my happiness, and our relationship if I became a better listener, small, medium, or large?
Yeah.
And most people, when I do the exercise, they say, they would say, no, medium. Yeah, that could really help. But the pincer question is, if you were to ask that same person, what has already been the negative effect on my success, my happiness, and our relationship when I have been at my absolute worst as a listener, when I interrupted you, when I changed the subject, when I talked down to you, when I got defensive. And when I ask people that question, they look down shamefully and they say, that person would say, large, very large. And then they get a flashback at some memory of having been a terrible listener, but it helps motivate them as opposed to trying to persuade them, because they're thinking, oh my God, I can't believe how I talked down to this person I love, how I was distracted when they were wanting to get my attention. So I've discovered that when you can do something like that, where they viscerally get, so you think service leadership is not going to meet your results-oriented needs. What has already been the negative impact on those results when you didn't listen to your people?
That's right.
When you cornered them, when you disregarded them, and most people will remember incidents where I demotivated them.
That's right.
Oh, really? So I'm just sharing it with you because.
No, I think it's really powerful, and to me, when I talk about the servant part of servant leadership, listening is a very powerful thing. Listening, asking questions, following up, and it's not about you, it's about them, and how can you get the best out of them, and then when you do that to them, then they'll start to ask you questions and become a listener about you, and so you can share. It's a give and take. If you think all the brains are in your office or in your head, you're really in trouble. But if you realize that it's we, not me, and you need your people to be on your team, boy, listening is got to be one of the most powerful things, because how can you get their suggestions if you don't listen? And it's really is funny, because I know the stuff you're doing. When I used to consult out there, and I would be in the top manager's team, and somebody'd say something, and then the leader would go off and take it and go somewhere, and I would stop him after a while and say, why don't you say, tell me more, which is a really great listening follow-up question, or do you have anything more to say about that? How about the rest of you? what do you think about what Al just said? Where does that fit in with where we're going to go? And you're asking these questions where it sets you up to be a listener and also sets them up to start to be listeners too. Because
Something
you're absolutely right that a key to a successful marriage is to listen to each other, not and I often wonder, you fell in love. Why are you separating? Why are you getting a divorce? Well, you'd know that they weren't listening to each other, and so that you know, Margie, she'll have great things, I'll be blabbering about it. And she might go, you know, or tell me more. She's a great listener. And when we started the company, it was much better for her to be president than me, because she's much better at that kind of stuff. And but I think you're onto something. I just can't think of anything that's a more important trait for an effective servant leader or any kind of leader, is it listening rather than speaking.
So I'm going to give you an insight into you in our conversation, because I'm going to assume that you like to learn. Is that true?
Yes.
So I spoke in my book, Just Listen, has done very well around the world. And I was a main speaker along with Daniel Kahneman in Moscow a few years ago. He wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, won the Nobel Prize. And something that I did with 1,000 Russians there that I've been trying to do ever since is I'm trying to teach people that whoever you're with, whenever you're with them, they're always listening for something underneath their listening to you.
Yeah.
And if you can know that it's always present, and if you can tune into that and give them what they're listening for, they're going to lean forward towards you and engage. So in this conversation, I'll take a chance, but we're peers, so I'm exercising my right to teach as well as learn from you, Ken. If I'm you, what I think you're listening for in this conversation is you're listening for the opportunity to share what you've learned, share what you're teaching, share what you're teaching through Gary Ridge and through recent books, but you're also listening for something that can enrich your life. You're listening maybe for something. Oh, could I try that with Margie?
Yeah.
In fact, the next time she kids you, the next time that you're chattering on, here's your homework assignment. You say, Margie, what? Before I started chattering, you were listening for something and I missed it. I mean, this was a conversation, but then here was Ken doing what Ken does. And I think you were listening for something and I missed it. And you showed your great love and tolerance for me jabbering on. What were you listening for?
Mm-hmm.
And she might say, well, I was just going to ask you, do you know where you put the key to the such and such? I don't know what she'll come up with, but I'm trying to coach people that when you get a sense that a conversation isn't going well, if you can pause and just say, when we started talking, you were listening for something and you didn't hear it. And in fact, I've gotten further away from it. So what might you be listening for that I missed? Yeah. Maybe we can salvage this conversation. So yeah. Does that make sense?
That's really good. So what have you been listening for as you've been listening to me?
Yeah. And then also when you say, tell me more, I'm a suicide prevention person. None of my patients died by suicide. So I'm trying to teach what I learned there. So when you say, tell me, you should, to your manager, you should be asking people, tell me more. But if you really want to engage your people, you say, the next question is, tell me more about what's really going on.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So the more you can get into what's really going on.
Yeah.
Now you can't do a bait and switch. I mean, if they tell you what's really going on, you can't just interrupt them and be distracted.
Yeah.
But when they open up, and
Hmm.
if you listen into it, they're going to engage and be grateful to you, because many people don't have this conversation with anyone in their life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things Margie said that I have to watch is that when I'm talking to somebody and they say something, I'm waiting for what's the theory that
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
thinking about, that I can take off from that comment. And so I tend to build on what I hear, but I might shut the person off from telling me more.
Well, part of it, look, I do that also, and I'll just share. There are insecurities inside me that still live, and the insecurities are, oh, I need to prove that I know what I'm talking about.
Uh,
Probably because there's something inside me that feels I don't know what I'm talking about.
yeah,
And so sometimes I'll have to build on what they're saying when they're listening for something else.
yeah,
And, and I got to practice what I preach. One of the reasons I have this book behind me is because I don't practice it that well.
yeah, yeah. No, I think you're so right. If there was one skill that all of us could really develop that would make our life different, it'd be listening.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely.
And so, and if you listen, your sharing becomes more powerful because it's related to where the other person is.
Yeah, yeah. I'll share something. I've been married to a wonderful woman for 45 years. And I love the heck out of her. And she has aches and pains everywhere.
Mm.
And and going to doctors, and just even this morning when I listened to her, she's just sharing all this stuff. And, uh, and I put down my phone, shut off my phone, didn't act distracted. And I looked at her and I thought to myself, I have this little saying, when your wife or your partner tolerates you, it hurts until you realize what a piece of work you are, and then it's a gift.
Mhm.
So I was looking at her thinking, she has tolerated me for 45 years,
Mhm.
and she's been devoted to me. And it felt really good. It was totally egoless. There's not much that I could add, but I just looked into her eyes differently. I looked into her eyes with eyes that said, if I could take your pain away, I would do anything.
Yeah.
And I can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm trying to do that more as I get older, because showing the people I care about how much I appreciate them.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
in and I'm doing it, I think, more by listening more
Sure.
than by anything I
So
say.
asking, is there anything I can do just to help you in this tough time?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So
And
thank you, my friend. You've been a gift. Where can people find out more about you? Because, well, the,
I think they just go to kenblanchard.com or the kenblanchardcompanies.com or whatever. And go to leadlikejesus.com if you want to. And but I think life is a real special occasion, and I've enjoyed this chatting with you because you made me think about stuff I hadn't thought about for a while, and I probably rambled on about my story, but it's interesting. I have a couple editors that work with me in our company, and one of them is just finishing a first draft of a biography of my life,
mm,
and she had me read the first thing, and Margie and I went, "Whoa, that's really kind of interesting. I'd like to meet this guy." Uh, but a lot of people think it's been all uphill, and but life is a series of. My father always said to me, "Ken, don't have your head down and grind into a job, do your job, but keep your head up because there might be learnings out there that you're going to miss. You know, don't get so into it. So I'm still trying to learn.
Yeah. I want to share a final anecdote, because we both knew Warren, and I met with him fairly regularly, and we opened up to each other. And I'm not sure if you were at this event, but there was a tribute to him in Boston when he turned 80.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
David Gergen, I think, hosted it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if Howard Schultz was there. I don't know if you were there. Tom Peters was there.
Yeah.
And so afterwards, we were, having one of our lunches, and he said, I sometimes get embarrassed when people pay too much attention to me. And he said, and then he leaned forward and he looked to see if any waitresses were coming by. And he said, I really liked it. And I looked at him and I said, Warren, one thing you don't know about yourself that you need to know, and this is how I began our conversation today, is you're incredibly respected and admired. And the only thing that people feel more strongly than those towards you is they love you.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons they love you, and this applies to you, Ken,
Mm-hmm.
is I knew within a few minutes, Warren, that I could trust you to never hurt me. It didn't mean you suffer fools gladly, but I could trust that you would never hurt me.
Yeah.
And that's not something that the David Gergens or the Howard Schultz or other people can say.
Yeah.
And then he looked at me and he said, I'll do my Warren imitation because you know what he looked like. He went, Mark, a lot of nice things being said about me with all these tributes and everything. That's the third best thing I've ever heard about me, and I can't remember 1 and 2 right now.
The third best thing I've heard. Isn't that great? Yeah. I think I might have been at that because I remember giving a speech about him
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. And
Yeah,
so,
it was in Boston. They held it there, and so you may have been there. Yeah.
yeah. You know, Tom Peters and I were fraternity brothers at Cornell.
Really?
Yeah, he was 2 years behind me,
Wow.
and yeah, he's a fun guy and has done really well and good stuff.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting, and I really I'm a big supporter now and spend some time with Simon Sinek and Brene Brown and Patrick Lencioni and because I see them as the next wave, and I just want to encourage them and all of them. They're terrific. I think.
Oh, they're wonderful. Well, they have you to grow up to become.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we need them going forward. That's for sure.
We sure do.
Marge
So
and I are hoping to hang around another 10 or 15 years together, but we'll have to see. And so it's feel very blessed as you do to be able to spend as long time as we can with a wonderful woman. That's for sure. And
absolutely, yeah.
sorry your wife is in a lot of pain, and Marge and I have had to deal with each other over the years with different issues and problems, and so yeah, I had a number of issues a while back, and she was just fabulous, and I dealt with her because she had a convulsion problem,
Mm.
and so but it's getting through all that and coming out the other side and being there for each other. It's just it's a very special occasion.
No, it certainly is. Well, thank you for the gift of your time and your friendship, Ken. That
Oh,
means a
good,
lot.
Mark. I enjoy this. I don't know what you're going to be able to pull out of this for whatever you need it for.
Oh, plenty, plenty. I'll send you the video. People on your side can do whatever they want, and I'll let you know when we post little segments on 90
You'll send us
second mentor.
you send us a copy before you post it so they can comment or whatever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That'll be great.
Yeah, because I got good folks that'll give you some feedback and
Well, actually, I can send it to you. I mean, we have a wonderful editor who's part of our team for 90-Second Mentor, and he does such a great job. What's happened is I introduced him to Gary Ridge, so Gary might be using him because he has a way of pulling out the most compelling nuggets.
Oh, good. And he'll
So
pull that out of this time too.
yeah, so I'll tell him to do that, and then I'll share all the nuggets with you, and we'll drop a nugget every few months of yours because there was just so much.
Yeah, well, you're making a difference out there, even though you're getting kind of old now.
Yeah, yeah. No, so thank you, and thank you to our listeners, and please share this with everyone,
Yeah.
because Ken's a gift to the world, and everybody, please take care.